With the help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga Daf Yud Tes. We left off on that Yud Ches Amid Beis, all the way relatively towards the top of the Amid by the Gemara. As we mentioned, since Mesechtes Pesachim Daf Yud Daled, Rab Chanina Sagan HaKoyanim, we did not yet have a sugya of Taras as we will have it right now. So before we begin today, we began on top of the Amid, the Mishnah, basically sharing with us three separate dinim concerning the dinim of Tum and Tara. It's important to review the Mishnah to appreciate the subsequent Gemara. We have in the Mishnah 5 levels: Chulin, Ma'aser Sheni, Truma, Kachim, and Mechatos. And the Mishnah began by telling us that Noitlin la Yodayim la Chulin v'la Ma'aser. And the Gemara is going to begin asking, Netilas Yadayim to eat Chulin, why? And even regarding Ma'aser Sheni, as we're going to have in the whole daf today, we're going to have quotations from various Mishnayos throughout Mesechtes Taras. We're going to have a Mishnah in Bikurim, we're going to have a Mishnah, okay, Bikurim I know is Zroyim, but we're going to have a Mishnah from Machshirin, we're going to have a Mishnah in Para, we're going to have various Mishnayos in which we will actually see that it's subject to a Machlokes Tanoim, whether we place Ma'aser Sheni on one notch, on a level, a notch higher than Chulin, and we will see that there are Tanoim that hold that Ma'aser Sheni, true, it has to be eaten in Yerushalayim, but other than that, Ma'aser Sheni, as far as the dinim of Tum and Tara, are actually like Chulin. We're going to be learning also on today's daf the concept of the kavana that is needed by Netilas Yodayim, kavana that's needed when one is going to be toivel one's Yodayim, as we had in the Mishnah, that when you have hands that are on the level of Sheni Latuma, so even though for Chulin and for Ma'aser Sheni, it suffices to do Netilas Yodayim, but the second line from the top of the Amid wrote that Ula Kodesh, imagine a person Stam Yodayim. If you're not aware where your hands are going about, it automatically becomes rabbinically Tameh on the level of a Sheni. And if a person then wants to eat Kodesh, which is all of us when Mashiach will come, it's not enough to do Netilas Yodayim. You have to be matbilin, only the hands. Not the whole body, but you have to immerse your hands in water. And the Gemara is going to be speaking about the need of having kavana while you're doing Tfilas Yodayim. We'll define kavana as we will learn today's daf. We're going to have other differences between Chulin and Ma'aser Sheni. We're going to have on daf Yutes on top. We're going to have various dinim that are going to be based on us having a certain general knowledge concerning mikvahos. So to speak it out right now, there are 2 options for a mikvah. One is called a mikvah, which is called a gathering of water, and one is called a mayon, which is a natural spring. They differ in various. For example, there is a din called ashboiden versus zoichalin. Ashboiden means that mikvah waters, not mayon waters, mikvah waters must be gathered in one place, which is why it's so important when you build a mikvah to make sure that water doesn't seep out. Is even if the water that is there is not mayim she'uvim, and you have the minimum amount of 40 saw plus, if it's not properly contained, it's not a valid mikvah. But if a person is going to a mayon, go to that Izal's mikvah. You go into a natural spring, doesn't bother me that the water is flowing. Another din, the whole concept of 40 saw, which we keep on learning that the Chachamim were Meshayir, that when the Torah says you have to immerse all of your basar in the mayim, that's the amount of 40 saw, which is around 200 gallons approximately. That's only when you go to a mikvah. Now, the din that you have to be fully immersed in the water is across the board. But if you have a small person and they are able to immerse the entire body, let's say in 35 saw, if you're going into a spring water, we don't care. We don't care about the shiurim and many other such dinim. And we're going to see that there is a machlokes tanoim. How do we view the waters of the oceans? Are they considered mikvah water, make shamim, or are they considered mayon waters? Big difference. Do you need to have 40 saw or not? Does it bother me if it's going to be zoichlin or not? And the phenomenal nafkamina b'poil, and that will be is that when there's a storm and there are times that big waves or blocks of water are, so to say, uprooted from the sea. and they're flying and they land on top of you. Now, they're not gathered. There is no ashboiden. So we're going to learn the unique shita of Rabbi Yossi that makes like a compromise. That seawater, on one hand, is like the mayon. It doesn't have to be gathered, but it has to have 40 sa. So therefore, if the wave has 40 sa or more and it lands on a person or a keli, as long as they are on the ground and the water landed on them, and it's not the them that jumped through that arch of water, we'll get into the details today, it's going to be a valid mikvah. But we're going to speak about the concept of the need of having kavanah when you go to the mikvah. We're going to have a case where you have on a slope, you have three natural holes in the ground. Top, medium, bottom. The top and the bottom only contain 20 sa. The middle one contains 40 sa. And there is a torrent of water that's flowing down the slope. And that torrent is connecting all of the three. But don't forget, still in one hole, you only have 20 sa. On the top one, you only have 20 sa. This is kosher rainwater. But do we say that they are connected or not? And that's going to lead us into the question of good asik, good achis. We had this in Sukkah. In other words, there's a concept called extending and lowering, extending and bringing up. We had that concerning, for example, the walls of a sukkah. And we actually paskin that as long as the wall is near the ground within 3 tvachim, lavud or touching the ground, then it's as if it extends up. So the schach has to be parallel to the wall, but it doesn't have to touch the wall. That's called good asik. We extend up. Good achis is do we extend down? And we'll see that you don't necessarily say both together. You can say one without the other, and many nafkaminas when it comes to mikvahs, and many other dinim of tum and tara. Let's not be concerned about pasha the placing, just to be aware that daf yutes amid beis is relatively a very small amid, so it's going to work out perfectly. We are on daf yutches amid beis again in the beginning of the Gemara. The Mishnah began. The first rule of the Mishnah is showing the differences between the 5 levels, chulin, meiser, sheni, truma, kachim, and mechatos, that for chulin and for meiser, it suffices just netilas yadayim. The Mishnah already said, but for kodesh, for eating kachim, even though your hands are only tummy on the level of a sheni, which is midrabanan, netilas yadayim is not enough. You have to be matbilin, and then by mechatos, as the Mishnah says, if the source of the tumas yadayim isn't because it's stam yadayim shneers, but like we mentioned yesterday, but it's because you know that you touched the Rishon, you know you touched inside of a scripture. There, once your hands are tamei, you have to immerse your entire body. That is what the Mishnah said. So Gemara is asking, 1 second, for what? Why would one b'chlal need to do netilas yodayim to eat chulin? Chulin umaiser mi boy netilas yodayim. Do you need to have netilas yodayim? Virimini. And now we are beginning quoting a Mishnah in Bikurim. Says in the Mishnah that hatruma v'habikurim. By the way, chavre, bikurim is really halachically like truma. It has the same status. It may only be eaten by kohanim with all of the dinim. Okay, so what happens if a non-kohen consumes it? So here are the dinim. If a non-kohen consumes it, b'mezid, he's chayiv or she is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Wow, chayav and alei misa. If the non-kohen consumes truma, and therefore the same dinim by bikurim, bishoigeg, inadvertently, so then the din is they're not going to be chayv misa b'dei shamayim, but not only do they have to pay back to the owner, to the kohen, the value of what they consume, but they have to add also the financial penalty of a halachic fifth, v'chomish. And v'asur lizarim. Now really these words are not adding anything, but since we're going to contrast this with other items in the Mishnah, so this is really needed for other statements, as we'll see in a moment. So they may not be eaten by a zor. You know, I'll tell you the contrast. Meiser sheni could be eaten by a zor. Okay. Vehem nichsei kohen, they are property of the kohen. What does it mean, the property of the kohen? On one hand, chevra truma is holy. We have to guard it from becoming tamei. But on the other hand, it's considered the coins. For example, Rashi writes that if the coin wants to affect Kedusha, even though the minig is to give a golden ring, but you can give anything that's kesef or shava kesef. He can give truma or bikurim and affect Kedusha, which means it's his property. Nichsei kohen. Another unique din, v'oilin be'echad umeya. What happens, I know there's many details, but bekitzer, if truma falls into chulin. Now, actually, if you can discern it, which would be what would happen if it's min b'she'ena minoi, if an apple of truma falls into oranges of chulin, it's really not a problem. Remove it. But what happens if it's min b'minoi? Apples and apples. So now that it got mixed up, you don't know which one is which. You should know when there is no mixture of tastes by chulin, the rule is batal beroiv. If there's no issue of tam for which you need to have 60, in your fridge, you have a treifet chicken, I don't know how it make it in there, it got mixed with 2 kosher chickens. Pi halacha, you can take out 1 chicken and eat it. Say, it came from the roiv. But if there is a mixture of truma and chulin, then it's only nullified in the ratio of 100 to 1, not a total of 100, total of 101. Only then, now there's a rabbinic din of taking 1 out and giving it to the kohen. But then do we say that it has the status of chulin? If you don't have the ratio of 100 against 1, then all of it is considered the mixture, the mai. I know the mai is sometimes used for something else, but this is also called a mixture. And then listen, you don't have to give it to the kohen. The kohen only has 1 apple, but the whole thing can only be consumed by kohanim. So 1 apple you have to give as a gift. The other 100 you sell it to kohanim. And by the way, it would be less valuable because since there's less demand for it, so you lost money. And here we go. That's going to get to our topic. Utu'unim netilas yodayim. You have to do netilas yodayim. Why is that? Because since the Chachamim decreed that yodayim have the status of a sheni, and we know that truma could become tamei even on the low level of a shlishi, that's mamash. So how can you touch truma without first washing your hands? And if the entire person was tamei, even though they went to the mikvah, but if they want to eat truma, they have to wait until it gets dark, head of Shemesh. That's, the beginning of the first Mishnah of the whole Shas. All right? Say all of the above are unique to truma and bikurim. Masha'en came b'maiser. What's maiser? I'll go one by one. Number 1, maiser sheni. There's no misa b'dei shamayim. And there's no chaimish. Now, I know they have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. But if they weren't, you don't have this level of a penalty. Another thing, even and Rashi points out, even though there is a concept of a chaimish, but it's not dissimilar. Chaimish by Ma'aseh Sheni means that if I am the one redeeming, exchanging the Kedusha of the produce on money, then I have to add a chaimish of money. That's not a penalty for violating anything. That's a whole different din of a chaimish. And very good. And the point is, let's focus on what's negeya. One of the dinim the Mishnah mentioned is you have to do netilas yodayim. And the Mishnah is saying over here, Masha'enken b'maiser, that for eating maiser sheni, you need not do netilas yodayim. And the Mishnah says, v'kol shchen b'chulin. In other words, the Mishnah clearly writes concerning many dinim, including netilas yodayim, that maiser sheni and certainly chulin are not susceptible to becoming a shlishi. So if one's hands are a sheni, which is as they are midrabanan stam yadayim shniyos, or if you know your hands are a sheni, you don't have to wash your hands before touching or eating chulin. Mishnah bikurim kashna ma'isa amaisa kashna chulin achulin. So the Gemara says, Bishlam, when it comes to ma'isa on ma'isa, you can propose the following answer. And guys, we will need to remember this answer for Daf Yutes Amud Beis. I can argue, the Mishnah bikurim is following the sheet of Rabbi Meir. Means our Mishnah is following the sheet of the Rabbanan. Which Rav Meir and Rabbanan ditnan? Now, second Mishnah today, quoting Mishnah Masechta Spara, kol ato un biasmayim, anything that has to be brought into water. Chevra, this refers both to going into the mikvah and netilas yodayim. If it's only midivrei soifrim, which means if there is a tumor on the level of a sheni, if a person is tamei on the level of a sheni, that's always midrabanan, mido ayraisa. A person is never tamei on the level of a sheni. We learned this in Psachim. Mido ayraisa, food and drink could become tamei on the level of a sheni. But not a person, not kalim, but midrabanan, they're tamei. They're metamei as hakodesh. Metamei as hakodesh means if it has contact with kachim, not only will it make kachim a shlishi, but like we mentioned, since kachim can even become a revi, so the kachim that became tamei can also convey tumor. That is where we use the words tamei versus pasul. But if something only has to go into the mikvah midrabanan, which means if something is on a level of a sheni, poisel as a truma. Remember that? Not metame truma, even though it's the same thing. Sheni that will touch truma will invalidate the truma. It's going to invalidate the kachim. The difference is by truma, it's the end of the line. It's shlishi of truma. If it touches another truma, it won't convey any truma. So the one that's on the end of the line, the chachamim call it puzzle, just to differentiate. This is a nuance, and that which is not only tummy, but it can also convey truma is called tummy. Umuter lachulin vila meiser. Clearly, you see, Divrei Rabbi Meir does not differentiate between chulin and meiser. And as we just learned also in the Mishnah in Bikurim, both chulin and meiser cannot become a shlishi. So therefore, when someone who's a sheni, if my hands are a sheni, I don't have to do netilas yadayim, because why? It cannot become. The chachamim hold that we do differentiate chulin and meiser sheni. No, it's like another notch, right? There's chulin, like we keep on mentioning, meiser sheni. Now, if that's the case, clearly you see from Pada, guys, remember this, that the chachamim hold that if someone who's a sheni touches meiser sheni, it becomes possible. That would explain why our Mishnah demands for you to do netilas yadayim prior to eating meiser sheni, so that you can meila farenthe. Elo chulin achulin kasha. There is no Tana that holds that you have to do netilas yadayim, and if not, you're going to make chulin. I mean, now I want to say no Tana again. People will jump. The truth is, we did learn in Psachim the shita that holds that chulin can become a shlishi, but we're not going there. That's rejected. That opinion. So the Gemara says loy kasha. The first answer is, I'll tell you how to solve it. You know, when our Mishnah says you have to do netilas yadayim, we're going to differentiate between only touching chulin versus eating. And the havamina now is that eating is something more serious. Again, midrabanan, even though the chulin won't become tamei, but if you want to eat it, you got to wash your hands. We're going to reject it. So the Gemara says, no, the answer will be over here. We're speaking about achila, which is why you have to do netilas yadayim, and kan, meaning the Mishnah in Bikurim that says mashe'en kein b'maiser v'kol shein b'chulin, is referring to only touching. And the Gemara says that's not correct. The Mishnah, the second Mishnah that we learned today, the Mishnah and Pada, they only argue, listen to these words, when a person is eating meiser, no, that was the machlokes. Do you have to do netilas yadayim before you eat meiser? Avol b'negiya the meiser, wow. Even the chachamim, right, who put meiser sheni on a higher level, if you're only touching meiser sheni, you don't have to wash your hands. And clearly, and when it comes to eating chulin, no one argues, everyone agrees that you don't need netilas yadayim. Netilas yadayim is not needed when it comes to the issue of I'm going to touch my apple. We don't do that. So why does our Mishnah B'chlal mention netilas yadayim concerning eating? Therefore, it must be idi v'idi, the Mishnah Bikurim. Our Mishnah is even speaking about eating, v'loy kash. And the solution will be, now the Gemara introduces an netilas yadayim that we are very familiar with. And what is that? We spoke, it began with Shlomo HaMelech, that before we eat a meal, before we eat a su'uda, defined by halacha, meaning before we eat bread, even by chulin, we have to do netilas yadayim. And the two main reasons is, number one, b'chlal, washing the hands adds Kedusha. It's the inyan of Kedusha. And the main reason that Chazal speak about is since kohanim, when they eat truma, if they will not wash their hands, they're going to make their truma into a shlishi. It's going to passel their truma. So kohanim, before they eat anything, have to do netilas yadayim. In order for the kohanim to remember that din, we made a takana that all of the yidden, before they eat, they have to wash their hands, even though for all of the yidden, for us, it's only when we eat bread. And that's the netilas yadayim that we are talking about. Kan, our Mishnah is ba'achila denahama, eating bread. So we're familiar with this. And kan, no, it's not, you're not going to make your bread tamei. You're not going to make your bread tamei, but you're lacking in Kedusha, and you're violating this takana of making sure that when Mashiach will come, all of the kohanim now will remember the concept of netilas yadayim. Imagine we're in Galus, no one is eating truma, all truma's tummy, it's being burnt. At least now, you're familiar. Before you eat, you have to wash your hands. Now again, we only do it by bread. They'll do it for any truma. really, even when we touch truma, we have to wash our hands because tam yadayim are shniyas. But that's the reminder.
The way we wash hands is different for bread versus touching food or something.
No. That's the washing of the hands.
Same way, 3 times.
Okay, so we're going into nuances right now, which is very important. So when we speak about natilas yadayim, so how do you get rid of tumah? And there is a huge difference of getting rid of the tumah. Let's say nowadays, when we wake up in the morning, we wash negel vasa. That's another washing of the hands, and there's 2 reasons for that, which is brought down on Shulchan Aruch, which are very different, opposites. One is because of the tumah that is imbued in one's hands, because when the neshama leaves the body, then there is a tumah. That's the way tumah works. Whenever there was higher kedusha, and then that kedusha is lost, tumah goes in there. When the neshama comes back, it expels almost all of the tumah, but the periphery, the ends of the hands still contain tumah. So washing of the hands in the morning is to get rid of the tumah of the night prior. There's a different reason, and that is that just like the Kohanim and the Beis HaMikdash, before you begin doing avodah, again, you want to add to Kedusha, and they wash their hands in the shiur. So we all begin our day by adding Kedusha by washing our hands. It's either to get rid of the past or to get ready for the future. And you're right, it's a different, the details are not the same. But it's both the concept of Natilas Yadayim. And Khan, the Mishnah in Bikurim, that says, Masha Enkein, B'maisa Sheni, and especially Chulin, there is no Natilas Yadayim, is eating anything other than bread. Peirid doesn't only mean fruit, anything other than bread. To Amarav Nachman, not only don't you have to, we actually say you should not. Kol hanoitel yada lepedas, if you wash your hands for eating pedas, harezim megase haruach, that is considered someone who's a gas ruach. And I just want to add something so people jump, hold on, so why do we wash our hands the night of the Seder? That's a whole different din. We learned this in Psachim. There's another derabanan, that if there is a source of tumah that touches water, midrabanan, it goes backwards. So it's not only does it not go down a notch, my hands are sheni. Normally, if I touch something and it conveys tumah, it goes down a notch. If it's shiur. Sometimes midras, it stays on the same level. Water becomes a rishon. So if the peda is wet, even though my hands are a sheni, what does the water become? A rishon. Now a rishon can be metama, food into a sheni, even chulin. That's why, by the way, nowadays the kavan is not to wash your hands, is to make sure before you eat pedas, it's not wet. What do we do on the night of the Seder? We dip the minhagenu as an onion, or if you're going to use a potato or whatever you're using, you dip it into salt water. It's wetted. That's the Natilas Yadayim. Okay, let's go back there. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a Braisa. Hanoitel.
What is it, Gasi Haruach?
The Gasi Haruach is because since, as we mentioned, the first reason of Natilas Yadayim is not only as a reminder for the Kohanim, but it's to add to Kedusha. So this concept of being adding to Kedusha, don't be showy. There's a level beyond which we say, don't be, you're not there. Tanach Rabbanan. Hanoitel Yadav. A very important din, a new din. The concept of Natilas Yadayim, whenever it's needed, says the Chazal, if you have kavana that you're washing your hands for tahara, and not for what? Because people's hands are dirty. So if you intended this is for tahara, we're not going into the detail. We've already learned in the Mishnah, if you had in mind for one level, it's not good for the higher level. But first, you have to have in mind it's for the concept of tahara. Then yadav taharas. But if you washed your hands, but you had no kavanah for tara, which means, so why did you wash your hands? Because your hands are dirty. But if you didn't have in mind, you're doing it for the ritual, for the tara, then you should know your hands remain just as tamei as it was. Wow. And that is, don't jump. You're going to have kashas. I'm going to get to it in a moment. That is not only true by natilas yadayim, but whenever you do tfilas yadayim, and even though we mentioned in the Mishnah that when it comes to eating Chochin, you have to do tfilas yadayim, but I want you to know that nowadays you're traveling, you don't have a keli. You know what netilas yadayim means? There's 2 sources. One reason why not roichatz in rechitzas yadayim, because natala was a name of a standard size utensil in the times of Chazal that had in it a receptacle for a revius of water. And since by netilas yadayim you have to have the minimum that amount, they used to use the words not law to take a keli. You can't put your hands under the water. You have to put the waters in a keli that has that minimum amount. One of the reasons for netilas yadayim. Even now, if you don't have a keli but you have a spring, you can toivel your hands, and then you don't have to do it twice, not 3 times, and you make a bracha al tfilas yadayim. So whenever you do Tefillas Yadayim, this rule is the same. Only if you had kavana that you're doing it l'shem tahara. Again, we're not going into the details that we had in the Mishnah for what level. That's important. We're not talking. I'm doing it for tahara, then yadav tahayros. Loinus chaven yadav tameyos. So the Gemara asks Hazoi, the Hatanya, second to last line, is it true? It says in the Braisa, beferish the opposite. Kavana is not needed to take away Tumor to bring Tara. Now, I know everyone is going to jump, whoever remembers the Mishnah. The Mishnah apparently says you have to have Kavana. The Gemara is going to ask all these questions, whatever you have right now. But first of all, you have a contradiction. Last line on Daf Yud Chesam and Beis, Amar Rav Nachman loy kashem. The second Braisa, when do you not need Kavana l'chulin? Let me give you a great application from the Rishonim in Shulchan Aruch. What happens if a woman without Kavana went into a kosher mikvah? In other words, not shaykh, okay? She went swimming in the ocean. I'm not saying that a woman should go to the ocean for a mikvah, but she ended up going into a place where there was a Tefilla. She was in nida. I'm not minimizing. You have to have sikara. You have to have the shivas. She did all the steps, but when she went to the mikvah, she had no kavana. We paskin, it's 100% kosher. A woman becoming permitted to her husband is considered on the level of chulin, even though it's a mitzvah to be together. And that's the rule, that going to a mikvah, netilas yadayim, tfilas yadayim, or if it's not for anything beyond chulin, you don't need kavana. Very good, daf yutes. But kan, the first braisa, we're going even up only one notch. And again, that's all according to the Rabbanan, that add that Meiser Sheni is one notch above. If you're going to eat Meiser Sheni, now that's for sure. If you're going to eat Truma, if you're going to eat Kachim, there's where we have this concept that when you toivel or netila, you have to have Kavanah L'Shem Tahara. And the Gemara wants to know, Uminat Timra, where else do we find the source for this answer that for Chulin, you don't need Kavanah? That we need Kavanah. If not, it's ineffective. We're fine with that. Where can we find a proof which will resolve the contradiction that any netila or tevila, if it's not for anything beyond chulin, does not need to have kavanah? Ditran, and we spoke out a little bit in the intro, the machlekes tanoim, whether seawater has a din of a mayon, because some of it is from mei mayon, whether seawater has a din of make shamim, and the big nafkamina will be, now when you go into the sea, we consider the sea gathered in one place. But as you'll see, the scenario here is that there was a wave, that Pasha, there was such a storm that a big body of water or a wave of water got uprooted from the sea body and it flew onto the shore and it fell on your head. It fell on a keli. And that person or that keli, they were previously tummy. If you hold that seawater has a din of make shamim, not Rabbi Yosi, of course it's not good because it's not ashboiden, it's not gathered. If Rabbi Yossi's chiddush is you have to have 40 saw, but if you have 40 saw, it's also like a mayon that it doesn't have to be gathered in one place, and it works. Says the Mishnah, and that this Mishnah mikvois is following that shita. That gal shenitlash, if a wave got uprooted, as long as it has 40 saw, it has one of the similarities with make shamim, and v'nafal al adam v'ala kelim. The din is it has a bona fide din of a mikvah, or now I'll call this really a mayon and tohoirin. Now, where does this Mishnah mention anything about kavana? So the attempted proof is from a very logical presumption. Since the Mishnah put together both Adam and Kalim, can a Kali have kavana? A Kali can't have kavana. Ma Kalim deloy machavni. Even though you can counter that, as we'll do in a moment, maybe the person who's toivel the Kalim has to have kavana. I know that, but the Kalim I'm gonna af Adam deloy machavin. And what does the Mishnah say? This is a Mishnah in mikvahs that the Adam becomes tar. There's a need of kavana. Yeah. You have to have kavana if a person is going into the mikvah to eat, a kohen is going to eat. Here there was no kavana. Doesn't matter. So the Gemara says there's no proof. Maybe there was kavana. What does kavana mean? Now, guys, if you don't even know what hit you, you can't say you had kavana. It means if you're walking down the street and a wave falls on your head, but maybe we're speaking about a scenario where there's a storm, you have this phenomena, you're witnessing how bodies of water, waves are, pouring down, and you're tamei, Maybe you're sitting and waiting. Maybe the case is you know you have to go to the mikvah and you're chopping a rind. With all of the pratim, what about chatzitza? See, you got into your birthday suit. You're waiting to become tired. And kalim, the Mishnah puts together Adam and kalim. Good. The kalim dumi the Adam. Ma Adam the boy the bar kavana. Af kalim. Now kalim are inanimate objects, but maybe it means that even if it's l'shem chulin, the person toiveling the kalim has to do it l'shem tara the mechaven lo. And by the way, guys, the truth is that we're right. For chulin, you don't need kavanah. We're just saying that you don't have a raya from this Mishnah mikvois. I'll give you a great application of kalim. We spoke about a woman for another application. This is another practice. Now there's a machloikis, what I'm saying, all the way in the poisker. Can a goy toivel kalim? Now we're not speaking about him telling you that he did it. That's a whole other sugya, whether he has nemanos. No, you witnessed it. It's back-breaking work. We know Tefilla is kalim. Pesach is coming soon, oy gewalt. So can I take a goy and have the goy do it? And it's all connected to this. In other words, since the emes is that for chulin you don't need kavana, a goy can do it. There's only one issue, that we don't want to lose the bracha. So therefore, if you make the bracha, we only make one bracha during one session of toiveling, and then you have hands that are helping you, you're allowed to do it. It's all connected because it does not need kavanah.
But it's something you don't say about it.
Correct. Okay, just to point out, that's the whole sugya, what kalim, but whenever brachas are needed, then...
Can you make the bracha on the phone?
Can you make a bracha on the phone? No. The bracha you have to make before you do the mitzvah. This is an interesting topic. It's all connected to this. Now,
there's also an issue with katanim. Right, if you can send a katan to do the tefillah, because
and he's making a good point. Same concept. No, it's kavana. Maybe I have to see what the place can say. I was quickly reading about the goy. Sometimes a katan, la bardas. The point is that you don't need kavana, but you have no raya from here. Maybe there was kavana. Now the chi tema. If the case is b'yoshev v'matzapa ma'ila memra, no, there's a big chiddush. Don't tell me what will be the chiddush. I would have thought that even according to Rabbi Yossi, my friends, even according to Rabbi Yossi, the only time we allow for this to be kosher is if the wave fell on you when you were grounded. When the wave is in the air, imagine there's an arch, and you have your keli. Oh, and I'm standing here, and you're standing on the other side of the arch, and I threw it through the arch. Mit kavana, it's not good. So no, the chiddush is that maybe the ligzer dilma asila mitbal. Oh, I'm sorry, I came ahead of myself. Number one is maybe we're going to think that you are allowed to toivel something bechardolish shel geshamim. What's chardolish shel geshamim? So Rashi says if you have a torrent of rain that's running down a very steep slope. How do you define very? I don't know. There's two issues. First of all, make shamim, like we said, has to be gathered. There's another issue. When the water is running down very steep, aside of the issue that it's not called gathered, it's not gathered, we can't even say that there's 40 saw. It's going so quick that we don't consider one part that connected to the other part. Rashi brings both down. So that's something that's not valid. Now, something is running down a slope, it's not valid because it's rainwater. Here, it's coming down the air. It's also going down very steep. Here we're saying it's good, but maybe you would think that Chazal would say this is not good because if this will be good, you're going to think that is good. Inami, rain, if it's going down the slope very quick, it's not considered attached. Very hard is a very steep slope, and even if it's not that steep, it's not gathered. That's the main issue here. And rainwater has to be gathered. We're saying that Rabbi Yossi holds that since it came from the sea, at least in part, is like spring water. Inami nigzoy Russian atu kapen. That's that even though Russian means that the water fell on, not that the water fell on your head, that the head of the wave fell on you. In other words, you're grounded and your tefillah came because the water fell on you, the head of the water fell on you. If you would go through the arch, machloikas, what happens if it's already grounded? If the head is on the ground, is the arch kosher or not? But if it's for sure not grounded, let's see about Kevin's picture, not that good because it's all grounded here, then it's for sure not good. So then, Komash Malanda Loy Gazrinon. And by the way, the Gemara says, how do you know that the loimat bilan b'chayfin, that you can't go to the mikvah in the arch of water? And we're going to follow the many poskim that say that in the picture that Kevin showed, which is when one part of the water is connected to the seabed, and there's another part that's in the air, that's not called kapin. That's good. Kapin means that the water is disconnected and none of it is touching the ground yet. When is it good? Only when you're on the ground and the head of the water falls on you. Okay. The Tanya, as we learned, matbilan beroshin ve'matbilan bechayfin. Why? Lefisha ein matbilan ba'aver. You don't toivel in mid-air. Bottom line is that even though we're not going to dispute it, Tefilla for chulin does not need kavanah. Netilas yadayim for chulin does not need kavanah. But you can't quote the Mishnah in mikvahs as a raya. Could be there was kavanah. Ela maha. The Tanach we learned in a Mishnah machshirin. Produce that accidentally fell into water. Someone whose hands needed to be purified. They were only tamei on a level of a sheni, for which netilas yadayim is enough, for which tvilas yadayim is equally enough. Someone without intent stuck their hands into the water to take out the produce, which means his kavanah was not to do tahara, not even to clean dirt off his hands. It was to get the fruit out. It worked. Mishnah says yadav tohiris. Guys, that's already the proof. No, you see that for chulin you don't need kavanah. Now there's another detail. What's the other detail? A detail is like this: that any produce from when it became detached from the ground is not even susceptible to becoming tamei, a food item, even if the greatest source of tumor touches it, unless it first became wet, but with the contentment of the owner. Contentment means like this, that the Torah writes, the chiyutan mayim, al kol zera zeiruah, the Torah is speaking about seeds, but it's referring to any product that's food that grew from the ground that's now disconnected. When things are on the ground, it always gets wet. It rains, there's dew, but from when you cut it, so it has to first become wet, even if it's later dried. Since it became wet, now it's mukhshar l'kal tumor. Now, what does wet mean? Natana, listen. Wet means, the Torah writes the words kiyutan. Kiyutan is spelled yut taf nun. But since there are no vowels, so it could have been read kiyitan means when you intentionally make it wet. We have the tradition of the mikra that God told Moshe, don't read kiyitan when you will put it in water, but kiyutan when water was put on it. It sounds like no matter when. We want to reconcile the yitain and the yutan, so we make a compromise. The owner doesn't have to be the one intentionally making it wet, but he must be aware of it, and he has to be happy, content, zufrieden. Approve. Very good. Thank you. He must approve. So here the question is: fruit accidentally fell into water. Someone removed it. So also, not only are his hands are tahar because you don't need kavanah. Who says the owner is happy by the fact that it fell into the water? He's not. So upeiros einam b'chiyutan. There wasn't an approval, and therefore it's not even susceptible yet to becoming tamei. But if the owner is the one that removed it, the owner didn't want the fruits to fall in, but now that the fruits fell into the water, listen to this logic, the owner is happy with the knowledge that when he's removing it, his hands will get clean. So it's not that he's happy that the fruit got wet. He's happy that it happened because now my hands are going to get, the moment he's content that his hands are getting clean from dirt, that's considered enough approval, because how did his hands get clean? Because he needed to remove the fruit. If not, he wouldn't have done it right now. That's considered enough of an approval to make the fruits mukhshar l'kabel tumor. The image yadav, again, yadav are regardless to hayros, but now v'hapedes, they are b'chiyutan, they are susceptible to becoming tamei. Bottom line is, the point is that we see in the Mishnah here in Machshirin that if I went into water to take out fruit, I had no kavanah, my hands are tahar. That's the source that for chulin you don't need kavanah. Says the Gemara Esvei. Rabba to Rav Nachman. Now let's bring it back to our Mishnah. We learned our Mishnah yesterday, but if we would have learned the Mishnah right now, or for those who did Chazara, the Mishnah writes two things that mamash appear different. And now we're going to start splitting hairs, which is great. It says in our Mishnah, that when you went to the Tefilla, if you only had in mind l'chulin, What was the huchzak means? Your intention. If you went into the mikveh and your intention was for chulin, that was one of the stringencies that we learned in the Mishnah. You went to the mikveh. I know that after the mikveh, I had no contact with any tumor. Doesn't matter. You're only taught enough for chulin, but not even for meiser sheni. In other words, what does that imply? That even for chulin, huchzak means intention over here. Intention, yeah. If you didn't have intention, then you're not even taught to eat chulin. So the Gemara says, no, that's not the way you read the Mishnah. The Mishnah means to say, even though you had, really, you don't need kavanah. Even if you had kavanah, now we have to go into the nuance. Kavanah for what? So there can be the general kavanah. We'll see later. If I had for tara, I will even have the right later to determine for what. We'll get to that in a moment. But there is no kavanah, there is general kavanah, and there's specific kavanah. This clause of the Mishnah is, if I went to the mikveh and I didn't just have general kavanah, I don't need kavanah at all. But if my kavanah was lechulin, now I limited the tara. Now it's only going to be good for chulin. Still, the Gemara says, go keep on reading our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, Tabal v'lo yuchzak. These are words of our Mishnah. Tabal v'lo yuchzak ki ilu lo tabal. If you went to the mikveh, right, Yakir, v'lo yuchzak means you had no intention, has no validity. So the Gemara says, and my love ki ilu lo tabal klal. So the Gemara says, no, that's not what it means. That's not what it means. For chulin, you don't need kavanah. What it means is, loy ki ilu lo tabal l'maised. Now that's already a little bit of a doichik, or it looks like a doichik. So the Gemara says that who's the who asked who? Rabba thought that this answer from Rav Nachman sounds a doichik, that who's over dochi kamat. But you know what? Later Rabba went out and he learned more and he found the following brayso. Dok va'ashkach the tanya beferish tabal v'loy huchsak. It's the brayso as usual. Elaborates more. It begins quoting the same words of the Mishnah. Here the Brayse says, Asur l'maiser, but mutar l'chulin. So this successfully concludes this topic. Remember this, that netilas yadayim, tefillas guf. For chulin, nida, isha labayla, tefillas kelim, doesn't need kavanah. But anything beyond that, and we are following, like we learned, not Rabbi Meir, but the Chachamim, that say that Ma'aser Sheni already is a little bit holier than Chulin. You need to do Netilas Yadayim, for example. Even, you had a mind, for Chulin, it's not even good for Ma'aser Sheni. Not even good for Ma'aser Sheni.
So if you went into mikvah thinking about Chulin, and then you decide, I have some Ma'aser Sheni.
You cannot go, very good, very good. So now that we mentioned this thing, very good, that's the flow. No, it's having intention for something that's lower, doesn't do anything for any other item that's even only one notch higher in Kedusha. Now we have an issue. Let's go read. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Taval va'Allah. Listen to the statement. If a person went to the mikvah, any va'Allah means he went out of the mikvah. We're good?
Son.
I don't care. Va'Allah, machzik atzmai l'chol ma sheyirtza. Guys, listen to this. He can later decide what the tefillah was for. He went to the mikvah. He's out of the mikvah. He can later make that determination. Now, how far later? This is an Amoida, Rabbi Lazar. So Tosfos says even this Amoida, which will stand, is only as long as his body is still lach. That means if there's still water on his body. The moment he dried himself, even before he got dressed, he can no longer decide for what. But this is a big novelty, right? Doesn't this sound different than the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah keeps on saying, if you went to the mikvah for chulin, it's not good for ma'aser. He's saying that as long as your body, let's go with Tosfos, is still moist, you can later determine for what. So says in a brayso, if one foot is still in the water, then even though that when you went to the mikvah, you had in mind for something on a lower level, and the 5 levels were going milmata lamayla, chulin, ma'aser sheni, truma, kacha, mechatos. Since one leg is in the water, you can upgrade your tefillah. Even though you're not going under the water, but your foot is still in the water. But the moment Allah means you're completely out, even if you're still moist, even if there's still water on you. Shuv einoi machzik. So l'choida my love einoi machzik klal. Rabbi Lazar and Amoida is basically saying that when you get up out of the water, you can later determine for what.
So do we have this with any other mitzvah? Do we have this with any other mitzvot where you
Yeah.
can change your
So
kavanah?
very good, Kevin. Many of the Achronim learn pshat that the reason why Rabbi Lazar is giving you the power to determine later is based on the principle of Bereira. Bereira means retroactive clarification. We'll leave it at that. This is a sugya that we have throughout Shas. So it works. Okay. So answers the Gemara. If your foot is still in the water, even though when you went under the water, you had a specific intention, huchzak, you can still change your intention. That's a big chiddush. Means when I went under the water, let's say I had a mind ma'aser sheni. If my foot is still in the water, even though I'm not going under the water, I can say, you know what? I want for the mikvah to be good, l'shem kachim. I'm going to eat kachim shlamim. You can do that, even though you had in mind the lower when you went under the water. There is where we say, Allah, when you go out of the water, here comes along Rabbi Lazar with the new chiddush. If you went out of the water, but when you were in the water, you had no specific intent. Now, guys, don't jump. We learned today that aside for chulin, you have to have kavanah. Yeah. You had kavanah l'tahara. That's all you had in mind, but you didn't specify in your mind l'tahara for ma'aser sheni, l'tahara for truma, l'tahara for kachim, l'tahara. You had l'tahara. But you never defined for what. That's Rabbi Lazar. Since you never defined for what, as long as you're still lach, now machzik you can determine for what. Great, as long as you're still wet. But im huchzak. But if when you went under the water, guys, you had a specific intention. I'm going under the water because I want to eat ma'aser sheni. I'm going under the water because I want to eat truma. You had that kavanah. If your leg is out of the water already, you can't upgrade it for kachim. Einor machzik. And man tana. Now hold on. How does the leg being in the water good enough? Guys, there's different ways of learning the Gemara. So let me tell you right now. We said in the intro, there's a concept called good achis, which means we extend something downwards. Good achis down, and asik means up. This really is going to be based on the principle that we extend up. If my foot is in the water, and halachically we extend things upwards, what would that mean? That the water is on top of me. So it's as if I'm still under the water. That's the pshat. So says what the Gemara, man tanoi deo ragla achas b'mayim. You can up the level of the effectiveness of the mikvah. So Rav Pedas says this can only be Rabbi Yehuda. And what we're going to basically learn until the end of this year is that this will be challenged. Which Rabbi Yehuda are we talking about? So it says in the Mishnah mikvahs, these dinim are so great. Mikvah shenimdad, you measure the mikvah. The yesh boy exactly 40 saw mechovanos. Every time you go to the mikvah, what happens? Some of the water of the mikvah remains on your body. That means that if we knew theoretically that this mikvah had exactly 40 saw, if I go into the mikvah, I'm good. But someone who comes after me will go into a deficient mikvah. But the Yordushnaim v'Tavlo Zachar Zeh, two people go in. So number one, Rishon Torah Sheni Tamei. Comes along Rebbe Yehuda and he says, oh, not so quick. If the first one already went up from being under the water, but some body part is touching the water, that will be his leg, right? Im hoyu raglav shel rishon noigas b'mayim, then the sheni you start. Now think about it. Why would we say that, Yakir? That's called good achis. What Rav Pedas is really doing is that he's making a presumption that whoever says good achis will also say good asik. Okay, this is interesting. No, it's this you'll see going down is easier than going up. Beruchnius, we all know that. It's easier to go down, even begashmius. It's easier to walk downhill. It's harder to walk uphill. So this is based on going down. Now, since there is water on the first person, that water came from the mikvah. As long as any part of his toe is touching the mikvah, it's as if the water on him, water flows down, is still in the mikvah. And therefore, it goes on the other way around. And that's why we say, that's Rabbi Lazar, that's what Rav Pedas is saying, is that even though that's the Mishnah. When the Mishnah says, the Mishnah says that even though he had kavanah for one thing specifically, once you have specific kavanah, what did we say? Once you're out of the mikvah, too late. Well, no, but if one leg is in the water, you're still good. That's the same concept. Because if one leg is in the water, it's as if your whole body is in the water. Because we are connecting. Now, again, this is the presumption. the extension of up and down is the same. If you subscribe to good, you go down and you go up. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua. I want you to know that this machlokes of the Mishnah Mikvois, knows the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim don't subscribe to extending is only b'ma'alois derabanan. If the tumor to begin with is a rabbinic tumor, it's called ma'alois, means stringencies. Only there do we have a machlokes. But if a person is biblically tamei and they have to go into the mikvah to become tired on a biblical level, even Rabbi Yehuda will be moed that we don't do any of these extensions. In other words, if there was exactly 40 saw, even though the foot of the first one is still in the water, divrei hakol, we're going to go with the gra. The second one is tamei. And by the way, that works with Rabbi Pidos. That works means that what is our topic? This whole idea that you have to have kavana. The Mishnah, you have kavana. And if I add kavana for truma, it's not good for kachim. That's a chumra midrabanan. That's not a biblical law. So that's a good comparison to the mikvah. And mikvah is that we see from Rabbi Yehuda. Another version, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua, the machlokes in the Mishnah that we quoted in the mikvah, the Chachamim don't subscribe to extending. Rabbi Yehuda does. That is mituma latara. But if the problem is only rabbinic, avo b'mailas derabanan, listen to these words, my friends. Divrei hakol af hasheni tod. Everyone will agree, even the Chachamim, that as long as the leg of the first one is still touching the water, his pinky of his leg. So we say we extend, and according to this, when Afpedah says this rule that if your foot is still in the water and you can change your intention, only follows Rabbi Yehuda, he disagrees with that. He argues because according to him, it's not only Rabbi Yehuda. According to him, by Mailos Derabanan, which is our topic, that you have to have kavanah for one thing and you can't upgrade it unless you're under the water. No, Midrabanan, everyone agrees that we say good. Now, Amarullah, I want you to know that I asked Rabbi Yechanan, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and again, he's going on the premise of Rav Pedas now, that if we extend down, we extend up. Very good, very good, very good. So now here's a simple question. And what happens, a guy went to the mikvah, he's out of the mikvah, his foot is in the mikvah, and his hair is wet, and there was a small keli, like a sewing needle, that's tummy. When it comes to needles, people were fearful to put it in the mikvah because they were afraid that they're going to lose it. That's the whole machat shehin sun al mala sama'ara. They would stick it in a crevice not to lose it. I have a good solution. Stick it in the guy's hair. If you say that we extend the water up, then as long as his foot is in the mikvah, so that it's as if he's under the water, stick it in his hair. So I asked Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, needles or certain type of spinning forks, these are very small utensils that for practical reasons, today we have nets. They didn't have those nets. People were afraid to take it to the mikvah. By the way, even our net, you put in a little needle, you're going to lose it. Can you put it b'roisha shel rishon? Now, everyone, you guys, we quoted the Mishnah mikvois. See, here's where Ula already goes into the nuance. Ula says, guys, the first wide line, good achis, extend and lower for sure. All you see that Rabbi Yehuda says is that the water that's on the body of the first is considered as if it's in the mikvah. That's because we extend down, say that. But good asik, maybe lacelay, maybe it doesn't go up. Oy Dilma, like the sugya above that we made this comparison, good asik, nami islay. That's what he asked of Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabbi Yechanan responded, I'll prove it to you from the following Braisa. The Braisa speaking about Sholosh Gimamiyos. I'm sorry, a crevice, a hole that is Banachal. Nachal means a valley. Valley means there's a slope. That's the key. There's a slope, and you have the top hole, the medium hole, the middle hole, and the bottom hole. And the upper hole and the bottom hole only contain 20 saw. And by the way, they're filled with rainwater, but you don't have the minimum amount. The middle one has 40 saw. For the second time of this Amud, we're going to be speaking about a torrent of rainwater. We're not speaking about toiveling in the torrent. We already learned today you can't. But you know what the current does? The current connects all of these three holes together. You see, guys? Extend down, extend up. Oh, So Vash taken the Braisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, listen to these words. This is quoting Rabbi Yechanan, that Meir, Hoya Oimer, my colleague Rav Meir always says that you can go into the top one. And by the way, for sure in the bottom one. For sure in the bottom one. Even in the top one. According to this version, Rabbi Yehuda is quoting Rabbi Meir, but he's not challenging him. He's not challenging him. That's the raya from Rabbi Yechanan. And the guys, the bottom one is good. Why is the bottom one good? Because we take the 40 of the middle one and we extend it down. He's saying that Rabbi Yehuda is quoting Rav Meir that says you can even toivel on the first because we extend up. We extend up. So, okay, you see that you go both ways. So asked Ula and Rabbi Yechanan, no. I have another braisa. V'hotanya, you're saying wrong. It says in a braisa, Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, that you testament base, that Meir, Hoya Oimer, Meir holds, you can go on the top one. Rabbi Meir holds, not only do you extend down, you even extend up. But Va'ani Oimer, was when you quoted Rabbi Meir, he only quoted Rabbi Meir. The raya of Rabbi Yechanan was that since Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree, it means he agrees. No. Ula found a brisa where he disagrees. Ani means Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda say, betachtoiniyah. No, it's good achis, we say, which so it fits with the Mishnah mikvahs. That's why Rabbi Yehuda says that the second guy in the mikvah is going to be good. Why? Because the water on the body of the first goes down. We extend down. Good achas, we say. But asik, we don't say. And therefore, tanya. Now, what's beautiful of the way we're learning the sugya is that let's go back to Amud Aleph. So this whole statement of Rav Pedas, we're disagreeing with Rav Pedas. When Rav Pedas is saying that this statement, that as long as your foot is in the water, you can still change your intention. The way we would word it now, according to that's according to Rabbi Meir, not according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you take a go down. The only reason why a person would have the ability to change their intent is if they are under the water. Who considers you being under the water, even though the water is touching your foot? Rab Meir, let's go weiter. It says in the Mishnah, if you went to the mikveh and you had in mind chulin, so he said chulin, and not even from Ma'aser Sheni. Yeah, we're making a full circle now. It's very easy. What did we learn? The first Mishnah that we quoted, the second Mishnah that we learned today was the Mishnah in Para. That quoted the Machlokes Chachamim and Rab Meir, whether we differentiate b'chlal between chulin and Ma'aser Sheni. So it says the Gemara, our Mishnah can only be the Rabbanan of Para. The Shani Luhu ben Chulun L'Maiser. The Mishnah in Para writes, the Tilas Shadayim from Ma'aser Sheni. That's the Chachamim. But no for Chulin. But according to Rav Meir, they are the same. No, with L'chura, according to Rav Meir, if a guy goes to the mikvah and he has in mind Chulin, it should be good for Ma'aser Sheni. The Mishnah makes that difference. It's following the Chachamim. The problem is, it says in the Sefer of the Mishnah, that was the third din, that big day am haaretz, people that relax in the dinim of Tumor and Tara. The worst case scenario of a beged is not only that it had contact with the source of Tumor, could be it became Tamei on the level of a Midrash, which means it has the same level of Tumor as the source of Tumor. So if a person is a Zav and they're wearing pants, their pants are an Av. Big day am haaretz, Midrash for a Parush. Even though the Amaretz is saying, I know that there is no Tumor. This is called a Ma'ala, a Chumra, Midrabanan. They're not trustworthy. And the Mishnah went on, even people that are Perushim, but they're not Kohanim, so they're careful to eat, to live in a state of Tara, but they are Midrash Lo'echel Truma. Now, what step did we skip? If we're going to follow the sheet of the Chachamim, that say it's Chulin, Ma'aser Sheni, and Truma, then the Mishnah should have added, not gone from Chulin to Truma. It should have gone that Midrash La Perushim is that big day Perushim Midrash Lo Eichel Ma'aser Sheni. The fact that Mishnah didn't say it is Asan Rabbi Meir. The Amar, why did we skip that step? Because Rabbi Meir holds Chulin Ma'aser Kadi Adolinu. So Reisha v'Rabbanon v'Seifa Rabbi Meir, which is something not ideal. Answers the Gemara. Answer number one is yes. In Reisha Rabbanon v'Seifa Rabbi Meir. Answer number two, that we got to change the version. He had another girsa in the Seifa that there were taka the 5 miles. That we do add this notch. According to him, in the Mishnah, that's very rare. He had in the Mishnah, big day, Amaretz, Midrash, La Perushim. Big day, Perushim, Midrash, Lo Eichle, Ma'aser Sheni. You get it? Big day, Lo Eichle, Ma'aser Sheni. right, our Midrash, Truma, they added, which is ideal. We'll stop over here, God willing, to be continued.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good job.
Good Shabbos, guys. All right, Sunday morning, 2 daf.
Yeah.
Rabbi.